much for that, Jared. And that was a great way to start, completely unplanned, but that's exactly what tonight is about, is members with members, no one in particular presenting, but everyone either, contributing like Jared has, or asking questions, and us all giving, I guess, this opportunity to have a chat to each other. So thanks a lot for that. That was good. I have to just get my cheat sheet from underneath my dog who's laying on it.
Yes.
What else did I need to mention? Oh, I think, yeah, pretty much said it all. There are 3 topics, but they're pretty broad topics tonight. It's all about Lotus. Keep your Lotus going. Improve on your Lotus and buy your next Lotus. And look, it's based around some questions that we got from you guys. So thank you for those that emailed to me some questions. And, I have tried to get a few people on the call tonight to help with answering some of those. You may notice I haven't muted you. You may have muted yourselves, and I appreciate that because that can help to avoid background noise. So thanks very much. And basically, I'm going to get you guys to talk when you want, and we'll see how we go. But of course, you know what it's like in this sort of forum. It's just that little bit harder. So let's see how it goes. We'll do our best. Yeah. So I guess if you're not talking and you know there's a bit of noise, maybe just mute in the meantime. I reckon there's a couple of questions that we could sort of get the ball rolling with based on what some people have asked for specifically. So I'm going to ask on behalf of someone that sent a question in, and look to Richard Mann, who I know is on there. Hello, Richard. Yeah, someone asked a question about a Europa S2, and I thought this might be a good one for you. I'm sure there's plenty of others that have this sort of knowledge though as well, if you've got something to contribute. But the question was about whether it's possible to convert to an R17 motor, and what are the complications to doing that? Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Vicky. Good evening. Is the person that asked the question online?
They are.
George, yes, thanks.
Hello, George. How are you?
I'm fine, Richard. Don't worry, I haven't got plans yet about coming in at the last minute with some sort of suggestion for you. I was just looking at a few of the US sites, and I saw people had had some information on the R17 motor, but also given the disappearance of leaded engines, ultimately you've got the R17 and the Fuego, I believe, as unleaded. I'm sort of looking a little bit down the future about what do we do about this? Is it possible? Is it worthwhile? Or are there other alternatives?
Sure. It looks like you're up the mountains there, George. You snuck away and doing a bit of skiing just to keep yourself occupied.
No, that's in Canada from a couple of years ago. That's me in the blue.
Beauty. I have collated quite a lot of information on Renault engines over the years. I'm a bit of a hoarder of information, and I've posted quite a bit of stuff on a Lotus Europa org forum, and I was checking through that today, and the R17 engine is certainly an attractive option because it offers about 120 horsepower compared to 80 horsepower of your standard Renault engine in a Europa. And most of the Renault stuff is bolt-on mix and match, but I think the Renault 15 and 17 deviated in their block design and put different bosses on the side of the engine to mount the engine. So your Lotus Europa mounts probably won't fit, and then you get yourself into a bit of a re-engineering exercise just to get the the block to mount in the car, which is not impossible, but it's just an annoying thing that you have to do. As the Renault engines developed, they did things like put the water pump at the different end of the engine. They moved the alternator to the other end of the engine. They put different intake systems on. They put different exhaust systems on. But I think the Renault 17 engine is a really sensible way forward in that it's still got its alternator where the flywheel is. It still has the water pump where the flywheel is. It still has the same cylinder head exhaust ports similar to a Renault 16 TS. The only problem is with a standard Renault 16 TS, your exhaust manifold crashes into the chassis, and most people get a very big hammer and bash the chassis out of the way to get the exhaust manifold in. You're lucky enough to already have a very nice set of extractors on your car, so they would bolt up to your 17 TS. That's fine. On the intake side, the 17 TS has a Bosch J-Jetronic, I think it is, intake system. It's a very early electronic fuel injection system. It probably works okay. 45 years old now, and if something goes wrong with it, you might be struggling to get parts for it. And I'm a bit of an old school boy. I like one wire going to the engine for the distributor and one wire going to the starter motor, and that's about it really. Start to get electronics involved, and that's right off my sphere of expertise. The other thing is that the intake system is quite bulky, might clash with the bodywork on that Europa, and if you've still got the battery mounted on the right hand side, which in your car it isn't, no doubt it would bash into the battery. So there's a few little mods to be made, but straight out of the box, you've got an engine that's got a lot more horsepower, and it's a jolly good start to having lots of fun in your Europa. The engine will bolt straight up to your 4-speed gearbox, and if you're lucky enough to have a 17 TS engine, you get a 5-speed gearbox that goes with it, which is what was used in the later twin cams. So it's a nice addition because it gives you a really good overdrive 5th gear and good for cruising. All the classic old Lotuses like Elans and Europas generally are buzzing around 4,000 RPM as you're cruising the highways, and they drive you bonkers. So 5th gear is definitely a nice addition. But yeah, then there's a whole lot of other things involved. Probably the thing you want to look out for as soon as you go for 120 horsepower, you're putting that power through very small drive shafts and through stub axles that were designed for a 40 horsepower Hillman imp. So stub axles start to get chewed out, and they're extraordinarily expensive to replace. So yeah, you start chasing other problems. Engines start to roll around because you've got a lot more horsepower, a lot more torque. So your gear change varies every time you go to find a gear. Yeah, so you sort of start to open a can of worms, and one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. Now, as an engineer, I love that. That's problem solving. That's my bread and butter. But as an owner, you might think, oh, I've got myself the ultimate Europa, and then you go, oh God, I've got to sort out all these other problems, and you might end up not enjoying the experience that you expected. But yeah. But if you can find a 17 TS engine and gearbox, grab it, stick it in the back of the shed, and one day we'll squeeze it into your car.
Well, thank you for that, and I think that's the solution. That maybe it'll be someone else's problem, more than mine, but at least they'll have an option.
Yeah, there's plenty of options out there, that's for sure. I mean, people have put Toyota 4AGE 20-valve engines in, all sorts of Ford-based, you know, Fiesta engines. I forgot what they're called, Z-Tech, and there's Duratech and all sorts of stuff. So horsepower is unlimited once you start throwing dollars and engineering brains at it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Richard, could I just make a couple of points that's worth thinking about?
Yep.
Can I be heard? Can I be heard all right?
Yep.
Okay. I think two things, that the value of Europas, along with many other Lotuses, is slowly rising. And one of the things that helps to maintain and increase their value is a degree of originality within the specification. And certainly, you know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, they were not worth a lot of money, and so modifying them wasn't an issue. But I suspect it's perhaps a different group of people tending to want to buy these cars now, and so moving away from a relatively standard specification does alter the value. Also, I think people often, the reason you buy a car is for the driving experience that it gives you. So if you want to buy a Vauxhall 3098 from 1923, it's because of the experience of driving that car. And the last thing you'd want to do really is to modify the car to change that experience. And so increasing the horsepower of a Europa is something, whilst it's nice to have a few extra horsepower, 50% more or 60 or 70% more, will alter the whole, as you've intimated, alter the whole characteristics of the car. And then you have to ask the questions, why the hell did I buy this thing anyway? Why don't I just go and buy a modern MX-5, right? Yep. The other thing is that I wonder about the availability of these engines. I mean, I'm involved, as you know, with some historic Formula Fords, and people go, oh yeah, it's just the old Cortina, the Kent Cortina motor. You're able to whip down and get one of those if you blow it up. Well, I'm not quite sure when you last went to a wrecker, but I'm sure it wasn't that long ago, and I know that I haven't seen Cortinas in the wrecking yard for 20, 25 years. And so the Kent Cortina motor is no longer available for, you know, $250 down at the wrecker. And I suspect that later model Renault engines, you know, if you can find them, I have no doubt you can, but they'll be getting thin on the ground, and perhaps they're not the best way to go. You might be better to just increase the performance of your standard Europa a little bit. We're already seeing that with the modern Elises. For about 20 years, the go-to engine has been a Honda K20 with the gearbox. Drop in the back of an Elise or exceeds relatively easily, and it doubles your horsepower and just it transforms the whole car. But the thing is, those engines are now 20 years old, and they're no longer growing on trees, so the cost of the engines is quite high. So apart from changing the whole characteristic of the car, it's perhaps no longer an option, and people have moved to other engines as alternatives. So there's certainly points worth considering if one is considering modifying one's Europa to take it away from what it currently is. That's just my thoughts.
No, I thoroughly agree. I mean, I've spent 30 odd years driving, developing, restoring, and very occasionally racing my Europa. And in the end, I always thought I wouldn't want to modify it to the point where it would be difficult to take it back to standard. And I'm also lucky enough to have a very early S1 Europa, and my intent is to restore it to be an original car, because there are no original S1 cars left in the world virtually. They're all been bastardised and chopped up and modified. And us Melburnians are probably the worst. Renault 16 TSs were built here in Melbourne, so the availability of second-hand cross-flow engines was just amazingly good, and so just about every car's got a cross-flow in it. And the original engines went down the tip, so the originality of the car is pretty much lost. And I agree. I mean, if you want to buy a Europa to enjoy the Europa experience, it's kind of, well, go back to the 82 horsepower, put its 155 cross-section tyres on it with high profile, and go out to learn how to drive a car properly, because the tyres will limit your ability to drive around corners and it will take you right to the limit. I used to run big, fat, sticky tyres, and you could do anything with the car. It would never come unstuck, but I never really learnt to drive it properly. I never really learnt to handle the car at its limits. So, yeah, you don't put big, fat, sticky tyres on an Elite, do you, David?
No, you don't. And even on our little 7, I've got a tiny little 135 SR15, so they're about less than the width of your hand, and it makes an absolute delight to drive, because that's what it was like when it came out. And harking back to the Elise, I mean, I've every now and then, well, probably quite a few times a year, I get to drive an early Series 1 Elise, and I just revel in it. It's just how sweet a motor car it is as it came from the factory. And I've got a Honda in mind, and believe it or not, I'm actually contemplating taking the Honda out and putting my Rover engine and gearbox back in again, because I'm not driving it enough in terms of competition to warrant twice the horsepower, and yet I have to suffer the I guess the downsides of a higher performance engine in terms of a little bit of extra weight, but the whole experience is very, very different to when I bought my first Elise in 1997 out at Corla, where it was an absolute delight. And Series 1 Elises are really delightfully balanced cars in all aspects: handling, power, the whole gambit of things. And as I say, I'm seriously contemplating taking my Honda engine out again and putting my Rover back in again. But time will tell. And the Elite, our Elite, it's on skinny little tyres, and it's just lovely because it'll just drift beautifully around corners, and that's what you want, you know. That's the experience that you have the car for.
Yep, agreed.
That's
Richard,
go ahead.
Sorry, Becky.
Yeah.
I was just there, Guy here. I was just saying, Richard, if ever there was a car that was sort of, you know, designed with you're going to have enough space in the back for a whole bunch of batteries, have you contemplated doing a conversion to electric to anything?
Too heavy. I'm a mechanical engineer, not an electronic engineer, so I wouldn't have a clue how to wire it up.
Okay.
Doesn't appeal, but I can understand people's desire to go down that path, but yeah, it's not something that I'm striving for.
All right, well, thank you, Richard, David, George, for the question. Anyone else just before we move off this topic, we're sort of merged into what's right for a modification and what's not, and I think that it's an interesting topic all on its own, because yes, the older cars are going to start to appreciate. So, you know, what do we do when we love to drive them? Most of the people in our club appreciate them for their drivability, and that's why we tinker with them. Anyone else got any contributions there? All right. All right, well, I'm going to move on then to another question. There's a few people that, you know, are definitely in the go faster category. Got you there. Definitely agree with you, but love the originals as well. So I'm going to move on to another question, another topic. We might actually move to one of the other topics that was about buying your next Lotus, because I reckon there'll be a few varying views about this. I was hoping that Mark O'Connor or one of the Lotus guys would be, Lotus Melbourne guys would be on the line, but I can't see anyone on there. Mark, you're not on with us? No? Okay. If not, then what we're going to do is debate amongst ourselves, because I guess there were a couple of questions that came up in this topic. One was just to hear about what's going on with Lotus and what's happening in the future, and if anyone's got some insights that perhaps they would like to share, that would be great. But I'm going to put out there also another question, which I won't say just in case I don't want to talk about it, but someone asked about, you know, if the next new Lotus that you were contemplating buying wasn't a internal combustion engine, would you still buy it? Come on, I can see some people wiggling in their chairs. Come on, tell us what you think.
Look, perhaps if I just chime in there, I think the days of the internal combustion engine are numbered anyhow, and you know, being electric is no barrier to performance or handling or any of those sorts of things. You know, if Colin Chapman was alive, he'd be building electric Lotuses now. I don't see any problem with it. Quite happy to have one. Don't expect that I'll be able to afford one, however.
Well, of course, Lotus is building an electric car, and it only costs, I think it's $3 million when it gets into production. So you must be pretty well heeled if you can contemplate that.
I think they're trying to, you know, they're shifting away from their core base of people that buy the cars in the first place. So to me, as David was talking about before, it's the experience of driving. So if you then go and put an motor in, and yes, from a performance point of view, maximum torque from the time you put your foot down, etc., and you can sit there and make boom boom noises, I suppose, in the car while you're going along. But people buy the cars because they're raw, visceral experience. You get to change your own gears there. Let's face it, if you were buying a car for a lovely, comfortable, everyday driver, you wouldn't buy a Lotus. You know, you put up with all the rest of the crap, bad ride, and else, because when you get on the racetrack, it handles beautifully, it reacts magnificently, and breathe on the steering wheel, it changes direction. Those are all the things that you buy the Lotus for, and the joy of the petrol experience. So to me, they're trying to move it into a totally different marketplace. You know, it'll be a very interesting experiment to see whether they create a new group of people. As I'm not completely convinced. I don't think I'd be super excited about buying a Lotus with an electric motor, even though I think it's inevitable. It's still not what I would buy a Lotus for.
Look, I actually think Lotus departed from, you know, the purest sort of car quite a long time ago. My car's an Exige S, a 2007, and I think as soon as the V6s started to appear, it was probably game over as far as I was concerned. I note that Lotus Melbourne has sent me lots of brochures and things like that over the years, trying to convince me that it was time to update my car. And I can't think of anything that the new cars do that would, you know, make me want to buy one of those instead of the car I have. You know, they're all heavier. Yes, they've got some more power and all that sort of stuff, but I'm 66. My car scares the shit out of me sometimes anyway. I don't actually need more power. So, you know, it's sort of, I think that Geely's intentions are to put Lotus up on a supercar pedestal, and you know, there's a market there, but I'm not in that market, and I guess the traditional Lotus owners aren't either. But you know, there's a whole new generation of people who are discovering the brand and its heritage, and are looking for cars that, you know, are going to compete in that supercar category.
Yeah, John, I think you're right, Lee. It's a different market is opening up. You know, the Asian market that traditionally, look, you know, no disrespect to them, their attitude towards motor cars is different to ours, because quite frankly, they haven't had the generations of experience that we have had. And so if you want to get into a Tesla, as I have, and put your foot down, whoa, away you go. But then what? Then what? If we do it again, okay, let's do it again. We'll turn around and go back and do it again. There's no visceral experience, as I put in my email to Vicky, unless you have experienced a top fuel dragster, you don't know what the experience of an internal combustion engine is. If you've ever been near one, the ground shakes, so forth and so on, which obviously doesn't happen even in the most potent of Lotus, but there's something about the noise of an internal combustion engine that does something to people like me, and I assume like the majority of you. Without that noise, it's nothing. So there you go. That's my thoughts.
Thanks, Thanks also, Lee, for the 35 pages or something on visceral experience. I thought that was quite good.
Similar to Lee and sorry, getting a bit of feedback. Similar to Lee and Phil, I'd probably be keen on still with a manual gearbox and going away from the electric engine. I think it just sort of doesn't have the interaction or the experience. I think I'd maybe getting a little bit old school, but I think I'd be more to enjoy it. You're buying something like that to enjoy it rather than fast things. Similar to the electric cars. I mean, I drove the Nissan GTR, the latest R35. It's just very, very fast, very, very powerful, but there's no interaction, there's no experience. And a lot of people you see trade them in after low kilometres just because there's no interaction or there's very little experience. You could just be sitting behind a computer game playing race car simulator.
Yeah,
in the case of the Tesla, of course, you've got a 23-inch TV screen in front of you.
We're doing both at the same time.
I was just going to say, I had a friend who bought a Porsche 911, and he dropped around to my place one day, and I said, "Look, how's that new VW of yours going?" And he said, "Look, it just runs beautifully." I said, "Oh yeah," and he said, "It's very good." Yeah, and he said, "Handles brilliantly." I said, "It's boring, isn't it?" And he said, "Yep, it's really boring because everything's good, does everything well, but it's close your eyes, you're in a Volkswagen, close your eyes, you're in something else. No excitement." I don't reckon you ever get in and drive a Lotus with your eyes closed and get confused about what sort of car you're in.
I say they get the Porsche on the racetrack and it's still a lot of fun.
Yeah, nice car, but not exciting.
Well, have we got anyone on here who's got an Evora? Because, you know, they're quite refined and civilised compared to an Exedia and a Lease. Is there anyone with an Evora on the call?
I don't have one, but I drove one when they first came out. And it was probably the most soul-destroying experience of my life. It was automatic. It was like a big fat pig. Honestly, it was like a big fat pig wallowed around the corners. Now, I'm sure that they've improved them somewhat since then, but it was not to my liking. But on a slightly different tack, I think we have to look to history to see the future of the internal combustion engine. Around the turn of the 19th to 20th century, when the cars were invented, they were starting to take over from horses. And people said, "Oh, horses, you know, they're a thing of the past. You know, we don't no more horses." Well, you know, that of course is incorrect, because the horse industry in Australia is one of our biggest industries. Now horses are enormous hobby activities, as well as racing, etc. I think that's what will happen with our internally combustion engine cars. That yes, there'll be perhaps less opportunity to use them, and there may be more restrictions as the world goes towards electrified cars for a variety of reasons, mainly to do with pollution and driving up the stock shares of Tesla. But I think internal combustion engines will be around a long, long time. I mean, it's all very well for the Western societies to move to electricity, but you've only got to visit places in Africa and India and so on, and look at you know, what they can afford to buy and what they can afford to drive and how they can repair it, etc. I think the ICE engines have got a long way to go, and I don't think I have to worry about lack of petrol or lack of tyres in my lifetime. I always thought that tyres would be the thing that put our cars off the road, but you'll buy whatever sort of tyres you want for for an Edwardian car or vintage car or whatever. Just cost dollars. Generally about the same as the cost of one racing car for a modern race car. So I'll stick with my Lotuses, but I'd quite like to try an electric car, provided they could produce one that would tow 300 or 400 kilometres at a go. So I might have a while to wait, I reckon.
Yeah, and I know when I look back about all these different Lotuses that I've driven, and it's almost a case of, I haven't driven a 7, but I've driven an Elite, a Babyland, and they were completely different driving experiences. My Esprit was a different driving experience, as is the Elites. So And when I actually thought about it as well, they're all the different types of chassis. So, yeah, who knows? When Lotus produce a low-cost electric car and it's a different driving experience, we might find it's something different. Certainly, they'll need to get back to their grassroots of low-cost, affordable sports cars, not the $3 million Avia. So we'll wait and see, even if that ever gets off the ground too. I'd suspect the COVID pandemic has put a dent in Geely's finances as well as everybody else's.
I think we have to remember also Lotus have been here before. They started off with the simplest possible car, which is a 6 and a 7, and then progressively, like all manufacturers, gradually moved up market.
Oh, yeah.
The Plus 2 was their first sort of attempt at the Land Plus 2 was the first attempt at a gentleman's sort of express for the family. They then continued up through the later elites and Eclats and through to a supercar in the Esprit. I mean, when the Guy, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but when the final Esprits that sold here, they were well over a couple $100,000.
Yep.
And so they moved from relatively cheap, enjoyable cars to quite expensive supercars. Well, then the pendulum turned and we went back to an Elise, which was an affordable, if you can call $75,000 affordable, in 1997, affordable, relatively simple car, and then now moved up into the supercar. So it's just the clock's just gone around again, and they will produce under Geely another small car, and we'll all enjoy it. We'll go out and buy it and enjoy it, and then gradually they'll move up spec again, and who knows where they're going to end up. But it's just that the clock's just going round and round and round as far as I can see, as it does with all manufacturers.
Okay, well, I think that was a really good discussion. Thank you for that. I actually, Stephen Harrison and I discussed just the other night the differences that I experienced between the original Elise that I have and the modern day supercharged Elise that I did have before I got the V6 Exige. All very different driving experiences, actually. And the newer ones are very, very, very capable by comparison, but they do lose a little bit in the experience. Anyway, that's a good topic, but I'm going to move on to trying to answer another member question. I reckon this, there could be a few, so this is into the improve your Lotus, and I think there'll be a few views on this one. Les actually asked this one about whether it's immoral to install a cruise control on your Lotus, which is a Lotus Elise. Now, immoral maybe, but given the way the conversation has gone, I'm sure there's some strong opinions out there. Let's hear them.
Maybe if I can give you a little bit of background, I do like to cruise in the Elise. I love it. Last year I had a brilliant time. I spent 3 weeks driving all over the Victorian Alps. I went across to Alatoa. I was about to turn right and go down south, and I decided not to and drove north instead and went to Sydney and Bathurst, and then dragged back down through the mountains again. Absolutely brilliant through the hills. The dilemma was, when I got onto the Hume Highway, and I looked for a cruise control. I slapped myself on the head as soon as I thought that, because cruise control in a Clubman and an Elise, no way. But I don't know. Am I thinking the same thing? What do you reckon?
Well, I believe that if you're going to do any cruising on the freeway, I think in an Elise or an Exige, I think it's essential, personally, because I drove to the Bend last year with, to attend the track day with Tim and a few others, and sitting on the Western Highway on cruise control was the only way I could, keep my speed, to the limit without, inadvertently going over that limit, which is so easy in an Exige. So,
look, I agree with you there. It's, I think it's an essential thing if you're going to be using freeways, and particularly in these days of speed cameras and things like that. I've got really, really good long eyesight, but my dashboard's pretty blurry in my shorter vision, and I couldn't tell the difference between 100 and 110, and so I paid the fine.
Yeah. Yeah, well, same with me. You know, I wear glasses for driving, so trying to look at the dash all the time, it's impossible. So you just set it. I had the speedo on my phone, so I knew exactly where 100 was. Actually, I set it to 102 or whatever, and yeah, set it and forget it and just drive.
So you don't think I should feel guilty then?
No, not at all. But you know, around town, around the hills, yeah, you don't need it.
No.
Eddie, you might want to explain, Eddie, because this was an aftermarket installation that was done on my Exige. Mind you, I'll come back to the reason why I didn't want the cruise control in my Exige, but Ed went and did it anyway. Eddie, can you explain why you did that? Well, not so much why, because we know that now, but what it took for you to do that, please?
Well, at the time, I fitted it to the original Elise that we had, and then I also, once we sold that, I fitted it to the Exige. And it just was a matter of buying the stalk, which you buy from Elise Parts in the UK. I think from memory, it was about $80 plus freight. So I think in today's money with freight, we're probably looking at about 120. Then it's a matter of installing it yourself if you're capable, and asking, when we're in Perth, we asked Barbagallo at the time to just initiate the ECU to recognise it. I think they charged us something like $20 or something to switch it off. And that was it. It was just as simple as that. So it's a cheap way of getting cruise control into your car if you want to go that way. I don't know what Simply Sports cars would charge for switching the ECU on, but we knew Barbagallo at the time quite well, so they did it for a reasonably cheap price.
So what you're really saying, Eddie, is it's cheaper than a ticket.
Definitely. Oh God, yeah.
By the way, what I find with the Esprit, it has a natural resonance, and I find it not that difficult to hold, you know, around the speed limit on the freeway. It's just as I say, a natural resonance.
I think there's a fatigue that comes into using cruise control as well, because, you know, I optioned my car with the cruise control when I bought it, and I don't think you realise how tiring it is to constantly be watching the road, watching the speedo, watching the speedo. And, you know, we're all getting a few miles on the clock, so I think that anything that you can stave off going into the nanonap situation when you're droning down the highway at the very safe 100 kilometres an hour, 110 kilometres an hour, I think that's a good thing. So cruise control to me is a really smart option.
Except if you doze off on cruise control.
Yes. Well, that's true.
I will say though that I've got both, of course. One thing about cruise control, it allows you to take your foot off the accelerator, and not having to control your foot reduces the stress on your body, which is tiring. That's what I found anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh no, I'm convinced cruise control's the way to go. My normal road car, normal driving day to day, yes, has cruise control, adaptive cruise control, which is even better.
Yeah.
And you get used to that now. I don't know what I would do without it, but there's just something, and we were talking before about the enjoyment, the pleasure you get from jumping into an Elise or an early Lotus. Yeah, I just cannot think of a time when I get bored driving it. It's a similar sort of a story. People saying, "Oh, well, what sort of a battery do you use to keep your a battery charger to keep the battery going?" What? You mean you don't drive your car enough? you should never need to charge your battery. You should be out there driving it.
Unless you're COVID, of course.
Yes. So I should tell you my little story about the cruise control for my car, because before I bought my Lotus, I was in touch with some salespeople at Sagami's, and so we're talking about in 2006 or 7. And when I asked whether there was a cruise control available for the Exige S, I was told that if I needed a cruise control, I wasn't a Lotus customer.
Yes, well, I think one of the things that we've demonstrated in this discussion is that the option perhaps is not, well, it's not that it's not a good option, but it might be worth just adding afterwards, given our experience. It sounds like it's a good idea. So most people would agree it's a good idea, certainly for long distance. I personally don't like them, but then I would rather just enjoy my Lotus to drive. And I think sometimes the fatigue that can set in when you're a bit bored can be a bit of danger as well. So I'm going to